Hey everyone, welcome to September's Brands and Outliers meeting. Very excited to see what we have going on in terms of brands and trends and things that are interesting across the landscape and what's been going on.
All right, we're going to start with some AI signals that we're seeing. So this first one's really fascinating. Um, what you're seeing on the left is how the estimates for when AI is going to surpass human capability in all of these domains, they're just getting closer and closer to the present. The estimate used to be so far away, but now the experts are saying, no, this is going to happen so much faster than we ever thought. And what's really interesting about it, this theorization on the right, this is kind of the gold standard of a theory, right? Because it's saying, this is going to cause time-space compression. That's a concept that's been around since we started talking about post-modernity. What that was doing, how AI is going to speed that up, and that's going to have psychological effects on people, disorientation, alienation. That's going to really throw us for a loop. And so what's really interesting about it is at the bottom paragraph, our response, what this theorist is thinking is that we're going to really cling to these islands of stability, like familiar spaces, rituals, values. So these things are going to be more and more important in this time-space compression. So why this is a great theory is because it takes like structural change, like what AI is going to do to the economy and society, goes down into somebody's head. Like this is what it's going to feel like to a person, and how are we going to respond to that feeling? And I think it's just really interesting that they're saying rituals are going to be super important to us. Values. These are the things that we're going to cling to. And then the last bit that I excerpted here, because we'd better do that because psychologies that are driven by fear, instability, and disorientation, we're seeing that now, do not make happy, stable societies. So just love the connection between structure and somebody's mind and then how they behave and respond.
Super interesting.
Yeah. It looks like 2030, everything's happening pretty much on that chart.
Would align sort of with the fourth turning book we've kind of been exploring in terms of like when things are going to start, we're going to really start utilizing that technology and things are going to start really getting better for society.
I have not started reading the book, but it says about 2030.
Roughly, yeah. There's like a couple year span in the late 2030s, or sorry, early to mid 2030s, where he says, we're kind of going to enter a golden age again. So should get pretty interesting.
He's predicting utopia, which is a little different than what this report is saying.
It just things are going to get better, but I feel like AI is, part of these advancements are going to be what's fueling that ultimately.
Cool.
This one is a new company, Inceptive. They use AI to design mRNA molecules and then license those molecules to pharma companies. And they just raised $100 million led by NVIDIA and A16Z. And why I think they're interesting is, we know what AI is going to do to health, we hope, and it's going to all of these amazing things that we talk about. But then I wanted to contrast it with the last slide, because what about is this going to help social instability? So I feel like both of these things are going to happen at the same time, because there's these technologies are going to be in a society that's grappling with the technologies. Well, we're going to have amazing vaccines. We're going to live longer. Well, that's in relation to just the surrounding, social system. So it's just going to be interesting to watch that play out.
So right now, AI is kind of, entering the workplace, and Gallup did a poll and they found that 22% of American workers now fear that AI could replace them. And then this is up from 15% in 2021. So mostly it's among workers with college degrees are kind of steady, they haven't changed, but college educated workers doubled from 8 to 20% of people worried about, AI replacing them. McKinsey also estimates up to 70% of worker hours are spent doing things that chatbots could theoretically do right now. So people, are maybe rightfully scared of this. But then also less than 25% of US workers are actually worried about being replaced by robots. So I think people will just have to start being more educated about how to use AI in their jobs, and it will just maybe work more alongside them. Obviously, some jobs will still be replaced.
This definitely feels like, AI is obviously an extreme case of the hype cycle here, and that we're at the very, very peak of inflated expectations. It'll dip to the trough of disillusionment when we go, oh, AI wasn't all it was cracked up to be, and then we'll hit that plateau of productivity, kind of based on what we just saw. Maybe that's around 2030, where we really start to see the tangible, practical applications actually, realizing potentially some of these fears. So I'd be curious to see how much this changes over time? Is it going to downwards correct as, kind of like the reality changes? Because again, as we talked about, technology is fast, but humans are slow. And so the technology may be capable of doing this for a long time before your company implements it. And I think that's kind of what we're finding already, which is interesting here, is that the humans are the bottleneck potentially in a lot of this, not the technology.
Absolutely. So kind of speaking about that, so here's AI adoption rates. And, marketing and advertising are the industries that are using AI more. This is from 2023 this year. And then, interestingly enough, industries like healthcare and accounting, adoption rates are lower, which I think accounting, healthcare, especially teaching too, could all benefit from the use of AI.
That's interesting.
But really, marketing and advertising has really, kicked up the notch and really incorporated that.
Is this a reflection of the incentives of these industries, you think?
I think it might be also a reflection of incentives and also maybe just workload. I know that marketing and advertising teaching does too, and healthcare usually it comes out on top of the most stressful careers. I think just like the expectations or the amount of work you have to do, it might be.
I'm seeing when I look at this chart, I'm seeing differential rates of like where you are on the adoption curve. Like, are you like, I forget, the first adopter or a laggard? However, the categories are broken down. Like advertising, marketing folks tend to be on the front end of adopting new things, and they've got an immediate playground to use it with copywriting and design and things like that. And look at healthcare, such like generally a bureaucratic beast that's a barge that's so slow to turn.
Yeah.
So like you could look at these industries as moving from like early adopters to like the laggards.
Yeah. Well, it's also just the delay in terms of like the increase in productivity versus how quickly you get paid for that increase. Like marketing is straight away versus, healthcare. It will take years, if not decades, for that to be realized in terms of costs. So, as an individual, maybe you're not incentivized the same.
So this is interesting. The IRS is going to start using AI to catch people who are evading taxes, and they say they're going to use it with more large organizations like hedge funds, real estate investors, law firms, private equity groups. And essentially, they're going to use the AI to help detect different patterns and trends of people they think are evading their taxes and like shielding their true income, which would be kind of interesting. There is like an argument of like, oh, are they going to use this with, just everyday people? So yeah, this could be interesting.
I'm surprised they're not already using AI for this. I do remember hearing somebody told me once that the IRS oftentimes detects on personal tax returns if things are falsified because numbers will repeat. People have a hard time coming up with random numbers. So it's easy for a computer to catch that. I don't know if that's true, but I thought that was funny.
I think it's that the ratio of the appearance of different numbers, like there are way more numbers that end in 1 in a data set than numbers that end in 9. And so there's a specific distribution that happens with natural numbers, and if they're randomly generated, that distribution will be flat, and so you can tell fraud based on that, which is kind of interesting.
Another AI thing. So Instagram is working on creating generative AI panoramas. I guess so that, I don't know, influencers can fake being on vacation all the time. I'm not really sure. So it would help, people create panoramic scenes. Also, they are looking at labeling when something is AI generated, when an image is AI generated, or the creator has used AI in the generation of their content. So that's kind of coming down the pipeline. And it hasn't been released or announced by Instagram, but it's kind of been seen in the code, in the app update.
I have a question here in that, like, because I think ChatGPT I think maybe it was for text. They had an AI that would analyze if this was AI generated text, and they just gave up on it because it just did not work. I don't know how we're going to handle like the fact that we'll probably never be able to know whether something is really AI generated or not. Like, I don't know, because it's an endless game of cat and mouse, but I feel like the AI will probably win in the long run. So I don't know how we deal with that.
I would tend to agree with you. A lot of those like text-based, even they have some for images being released now, and I just don't think that they're very accurate. So
I saw something in here that I didn't include, but it's relevant to this conversation, that already today, non-native speakers are getting differentially flagged as, using AI to write their things, even though they're not,
Right.
because they tend to write in a way that's less, like using less variety of words than a native speaker. And so like the algorithms see that and say, this is AI. And like that discrimination is already happening today.
Yeah. I mean, if we can't distinguish between human generated and AI generated, then I feel like we can't have incentives to prevent AI generated content, which kind of raises an interesting question of just, is this just a fact of life we have to deal with now with all the content we consume?
Yes. Yeah, I would say yes to that. This is a cool new company called Biographer. I always like to highlight interesting positive uses of AI, and I think that this is really cool. They say, "Hi there, I'm the world's first artificial intelligence biographer." So it's I think a therapist started this, and reminiscence therapy is a tool that's used to help people with Alzheimer's. So you can use AI to collect all of the stories and generate like a single artifact that can really supercharge reminiscence therapy, because it's a lot of work to continually like tell these stories and compile them. So here you can have a really rich, reminiscence that's AI generated. And I think that's a pretty fascinating use of this technology, because we've talked about the intersection of AI and therapy for a long time, and generally about will we just go to AI for therapy, but now how do therapists use it to do therapy better? So this is a great example of that.
It's so interesting with AI generating the past and the future. We're like going backwards in time to use AI.
Time-space compression.
I looked at this. I loved it. They essentially like ask the person questions. They can just talk and record. And then it's been trained on like writing good biographies. So you can actually like, it writes a really good biography out of the story that you've created. So I think that's really awesome.
That is cool. You know what this makes me think of? I remember years ago there was a startup that was creating like some sort of like headgear or something that you could wear throughout your life. It would record everything, and then when you would go back to like watch the video, you were like immersed in it. So you would wear this headset and you could look around your own life like 2 or 5 or 10 years ago, depending on when you were using it. And we know that when you remember something, it's different than when you took a photo and remember it from the photo. I wonder how much like being able to step back into your life through reminiscence therapy, like through writing or immersive like VR photography or videography will change the way we remember our own memories.
I wonder if like there's also like a possibility that you can use your own memories to then change like your perception of like your future too. Like, I don't know, like what if like you could turn what if initially felt like a bad memory, but then you could retell it differently and then remind yourself like later that it was actually a better memory, not a bad one. It just would completely change your outlook for looking
that
forward.
Kind of reminds me of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. They didn't change the memories, but they deleted the memories. That's interesting. Yeah, you're right.
I can imagine like that. Good.
I was just gonna say, it gives us another off ramp out of the present. Because like if I can go live richly in the past, or I can go immerse myself in a very rich digital present, like we're yet another off ramp out of the physical immediate present.
Yeah
I just imagine that like you come together for Thanksgiving and everyone has a different take on what happened in their childhood because they've kind of rewritten it with AI. I think this is going to raise some new dynamics in terms of especially family, which will be quite interesting.
This one's short, quick. Be fake. It's just a pun on be real, but evidently they've raised $3 million in seed funding to create this social network. It works just like Be Real, where it's like what's both cameras, and then there's a prompt that you then use AI tools to customize it, and like so we'll see. I mean, I feel like these fad social networks, we're just going to see so many of them. But yeah, no offense to the Be Fake people out there.
Wait, so it's just like the pictures are all AI generated, or it's not like real, they're not real photos of people?
No, they're real photos that you then customize according to a prompt with AI technology. So like it's essentially Snapchat.
It's a Be Real ripoff with some editing features, it seems.
Yeah, like super hard AI filters. I think the takeaway for me from stuff like this, and kind of actually some of the previous points we talked about, is how ready we are to adopt these technologies and like distort base reality. Like it seems like we're culturally very eager to just start playing with the fabric of our collective reality in terms of what we agree on is real. Like that seems to not be as consequentially important as maybe we thought.
That's why I always call that K-fob, because there's the delight in the fact that we know this isn't real, but we delight in the fact that it's not real. And that's like such a through line, to your point, of culture, and we're ready.
Mm-hmm.
For this next section, we're going to be talking about sort of the era of strong ties and sort of the updates that we've been seeing on sort of this area. So the idea that rather than valuing sort of breadth and we're valuing depth in our relationships and our connections. And so rather than, a lot of weak connections and a lot of weak acquaintances, we're seeking more deeper relationships in our communities. On that point, I guess the era of strong ties is going pretty strong still. So, social media, essentially, this Business Insider article talked about how people are posting less on their feeds and they're spending much more time within their like close friends and, posting stories, like, being in group chats and DMs and stuff like that. And I think I could also personally attest to this. I don't post as much. I like definitely only follow up with my friends through their stories or just like through group chats and DMs and things like that. And even Adam Mosseri like also like specifically called out that this is where a lot of teens are spending their time as opposed to, posting on the feed. And it reminds me now of what we just talked about in terms of like AI generated like posts and things like that in terms of like, well, if all of our feeds are just fake content, then all of like the quote unquote real stuff is like happening behind like messages, like personal messages and like close friend, like gated like communities and things like that. And so, yeah, so we just want tighter connections and communities.
Yeah.
I think you see that with Instagram too. A lot of their innovations are happening like in the DMs and not so much in the feed.
Yeah. And then so speaking of too, in terms of just growing in depth, like trying to build more for depth rather than breadth, TikTok has been posting a lot of job listings that speak to specifically messaging features for their app. So it's sort of like we don't know specifically what that means. There's no like launch or anything yet, but it seems like TikTok is trying to innovate specifically around messaging and private, usually it's just for entertainment and videos, but there's more to see in terms of like what this messaging team is going to do for the TikTok app. So just something to look out for.
Wow. So they're seeing the same thing too then.
It's kind of interesting in that like TikTok, I feel like is the quintessential weak tie network, right? Everything is about connecting with people who you don't know. And then you've got all these other platforms like, you've got your WhatsApp groups and your, Instagram DMs that are your strong tie networks where you have those engagements. It's really interesting because with TikTok trying to round the circle, like, are they going to become Facebook again? Like we started off with one feed that had everyone on it. Like, do we round the circle there again? I don't know, but this is kind of interesting to keep an eye on in that like the dynamics of how our weak tie networks are evolving and trying to pretend to be deep tie networks will be very interesting.
You bring up such a good point. Like how do they expect to innovate in messaging when everything on that platform is pushing you towards weak ties instead of strong ties? That's so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, like what this raises for me is like we don't think when you think about change over time, you don't think that your subjective experience changes really as a human. We don't think about like even think on your own life course. You can't remember what you thought like when you were 18. Like you were but like you don't think the same way. So like we don't think that collectively like the way in which we think and like subjectivity itself can like be changed. And this is kind of clear indication that it is, because like the social media era, like it's no longer serving. And so like we don't want this. So it feels different. And like it's tough to explain that, but it's like really clear that there is some like mass subjective change happening.
That's a positive. That's positive.
And so, obviously, again, like I mentioned maybe earlier, was that there's like a bunch of apps like Be Real and like all these other like anti-social like media app type apps like popping up like left and right. This is just another one of them. And this one's supposed to remind you to like keep in touch with the ones you love. And so it sends you little reminders if it's been a while, like, oh, you should text your best friend. It's been like a couple weeks, which seems kind of sweet. But yeah, so just that's kind of like a very specific app. And it's a reminder that like there are like social media or other apps that are trying to sort of facilitate stronger ties with things like this, where you can just simple reminders, for example.
I was blown away.
Go ahead.
I was blown away. I visited a friend and he had a chalkboard. This was 10 years ago. He had 20 people's names on it, and he had the dates that he last emailed them, last had a phone call with them, like all these like, and he would keep track of this on a chalkboard in his room. And I was like, that blew my mind that somebody was like that, like like record keeping about this. So he could have used ketchup for sure. Like,
I mean,
a
what
CRM
this
for your
is,
personal life.
Exactly. No, this is a CRM. And I think what's kind of interesting is that, like, I think of like what we talked about a while, like before we started recording these, of like chat phishing, right? The idea that you can talk to someone and you're using ChatGPT to come up with all the prompts. And so, it's not quite you, but it kind of is. Like, it has the intentions of you, but the poetry of an AI. And I kind of just wonder about like digitally assisted intimacy. Like, oh, they keep in touch with me, they check on me every single day, and it's like, well, actually that message is AI generated. Like, does it matter? Because I think it doesn't. Like, I think the what we're seeing is that we don't care. It's the intention that matters, not like, so I use an AI which helps me check on you and reminds me to check on you. The intention of me doing that is sufficient, even though like it's that digitally assisted.
Yeah,
I'm laughing because I think you just go ahead,
no,
Rebecca.
go ahead.
I'm laughing because I think you just described a category of person that doesn't exist, right? Like, I care enough about checking in on you, but not enough that I'm going to personally do it. And I'm going to generate an AI message to do that check in for me. Like, that's a psychopath. Like, who does that? Like, who is that person?
Well, I think that like the way we're headed, the direction we're headed is that a lot of AI are gonna, I mean, more and more like they're supporting, like we have an intention and they'll help us execute it. So I mean,
Sure.
it's funny, but it's a real question of like, as this evolves, like digital intimacy in that regard, or digitally supported intimacy is a fair question, of like, is this a new behavior and how do we relate to it?
Sure, totally. Yeah, I hear you.
It is
And it's
fun.
like I'd love to be in the catch-up like board meeting. So like John Appleseed, like great, like the decision to like that's one of our names. This is a new app to Cast. I think this is pretty interesting. It's definitely strong ties because we all watch things. We all have many different streaming services. What this enables you to do is to share a screen across time space or across space. So you can get together with up to 100 different people and like share the experience of watching something digitally together. Like that's what this app facilitates. And I think like, obviously, I'm sure this was born out of the pandemic. Like, wouldn't it be great if this existed? And so this got started after that. And I think that there's probably potential for a service like this.
It's the exact opposite of the movie theater. Everyone should be texting while watching, which I feel like is a natural state for us at this point.
YouTube started doing this as well. Like, I always get pop-ups. Oh, like you should share this and watch it with so-and-so. And I'm like, okay, well, yeah, definitely shared experience together for sure.
So this is super interesting. When we think about strong ties and we think about influencers, that affects so much of sort of, how they make money and their livelihood and things like that, and how they build their relationships with their followers. And this app is essentially, so there's a couple of companies, but TrovaTrip, for example, as an influencer, you can take yourself and some followers on a trip together, and you get, as a creator, like 20% of like the revenue. And so it's another way of just making money, but at the same time, like you're bringing along like some of your followers to this trip, which is sort of fascinating. Which like, does that make influencers like a travel agent of some sort? Are they like, because some of the reasons why these followers would go is like, oh, like I wouldn't go because like I was afraid of traveling solo. So, but this opportunity gave me a chance to like go with other people who like follow the same influencer as I do. And some of these people have like, or like they've been able to make friends with some of these people and become really close friends with each other. And turns out it's like actually the best almost indicator of compatibility in terms of if you follow the same influencer. Yeah, it says that like we've heard stories of travelers going on and becoming roommates or even getting married. One of our earlier hosts, she met her surrogate on TrovaTrip and now has a baby because of it. It's just sort of very interesting how these people are like meeting each other and building these relationships, especially, in a world where like this is how strong ties can get really intertwined. I think we only think of strong ties of just being with just having similar characteristics or tastes and stuff like that with other people, but like what does it mean to have a strong tie that's so intimately connected, like to have a baby with somebody or build a family? Like what does that mean for how we build communities and connection? So just super fascinating, and how like TrovaTrip is sort of like created this thing like unintentionally in some ways. But yeah, so then at the same time, like it's also a question of like how is an influencer's role shifting? It seems sort of like a big expectation for an influencer then to like bring all these people and that be the expectation to like maybe meet your future spouse or your next best
Maybe we
friend
move
in the whole
on.
wide world, you know?
This is so interesting. I think what I take away from this is that like we have to see influencers as really communities now. And it's just so interesting that like the exact same reason why TikTok is investing in messaging is the same thing that's happening here. And I think this just is like we should really, if we're running this prediction further of okay, this is a brand new piece of infrastructure for the strong tie world, like what other things might happen? Like what other infrastructure might we build that just does not exist today? I think this is a super interesting signal.
So, as we all know, malls overall are doing really poorly, physical malls. So, about from like 2017 to 2022, year over year, malls have decreased like the amount of malls by 17%. Like they're just going down. However, Asian focused malls are thriving, and they've been really thriving post pandemic,
Wow.
and really kind of like, bucking that trend of like malls in decline. And really, it's kind of become, in terms of strong ties, like a very much a place for community and connection. So there's more than just shopping. There's food, there's activities, there's events that will be hosted. So they're really just seeing it's like a draw for the community to really congregate and come together. Um, Again, so they're just really catering to a very specific community, but it's bringing everyone together. So.
So this next section is a sort of a series of signals that sort of speak to some of the things that we're noticing in the context of what it means to, like gender roles and sort of the expectations of these genders and sort of how like external factors can affect how or like affirm or maybe, question some of like our pre-existing ideas of like what gender and having, being a male or female or anything in between means. So yeah, we'll see that in the next few slides.
We both flagged
Yeah.
this one because it's really interesting. It's inside Silicon Valley's new boys club, testosterone testing tea parties. A bunch of people can get together who are looking to raise their testosterone. It's almost like an Avon party, like where it's guided by a host that brings them together and helps them do this. And like they can trade knowledge, talk about what are you doing to boost your tea, like learn from each other. It's a sense of community all around a shared goal, obviously highly relatable goal. Learn, test, talk, test their blood. I just think it's really, really fascinating, especially in light of the next slide. They kind of go together in my mind, because this next slide is about the end. Are we prepared for the end of obesity? Because we used to there's these two dialogues on obesity. It's, all of the other factors that are out of the individual's control, or it's the individual's control. But now with these new drugs, it's coming to seem like, well, it's actually, if you're not doing something about this, it's on you. Like, you don't have to be you don't have to be overweight. Like, there's going to be all these things. And so, like, culturally, what's going to happen when that's like the thing? But both of these taken together, like, illustrate maximizing, optimizing. Like, we used to just be able to live. You used to just be able to simply be. But now there's all this cultural pressure to optimize, maximize. Like, you have the technology, science exists. You can do all these things. Why are you not doing these things? So it's a newfound cultural pressure that like just wasn't there before, which I can imagine creates a lot of stress in people's lives in a new way that just wasn't there before.
Yeah. Yeah.
Similar theme. Knife guys finished last. There's just been a surge in Botox procedures for men, and you can see the different types of Botox procedures. Cheek implants are the biggest one. Just to give you, a more defined cheek line. One of the theories from this article was, it's just we're saturated making women feel bad and insecure about their appearance. Like we're on to the next. I don't prefer that explanation. I feel like it's a little conspiratorial. Rather, the more accurate answer is just that culture is shifting and men are now feeling the pressure that I was talking about before to, improve themselves. And especially in the context of like involuntary celibates and all the toxic masculinity stuff you hear about needing to, get a partner and how like, there's just this desire, like really toxic, male improvement. It's just coming to men culturally, not because some beauty cabal got together and said, let's make this happen.
Yeah, speaking on sort of the obesity, like Ozempic point, this Danish pharmaceutical company in Europe, recently surpassed very briefly LVMH, which is kind of a big deal, making them sort of the most valuable company in Europe. So just an interesting signal based on like how culture is shifting, what we're valuing more, like our health versus maybe like luxury and the traditional like sense of luxury, I guess, in Europe, I guess specifically, considering that LVMH is like such a huge part of the European economy. So yeah, this one is an article that I came across in terms of it might not be super surprising necessarily, but it's interesting to sort of, talk about in the context of, why maybe women are opting out of motherhood, and that one of the main reasons being exclusively because they just simply can't afford it. And so, what does that mean? Where then they spending their time if they're not going to be like it's just like a lot to consider there. And it's not that like maybe mothers, it's not that they necessarily don't want children but the fact that like the first barrier could be financial and not anything else is interesting.
It's a big part
I,
of why more and more women are waiting to have kids later, or not just women, couples in general.
I wonder, I would predict that in the next 10 to 15 years, a country in Europe starts to experiment with a lot of financial aid in this direction, or at least trying to mitigate a lot of this cost, because Europe is aging at a far more rapidly. Really, I mean, especially Germany is aging the fastest. So it'd be interesting to see. Probably they would do something about this at some point, because the downstream effects economically are pretty heavy.
I can't prove this, but I would suspect and wager a lot on that how this is a very heavily classed phenomenon. Because like, oh, the markets aren't right. We shouldn't have a kid now. It's really expensive. All the costs, like that's a consideration that isn't even in a lot of people's minds. Like this is speaking to like a very specific class of potential mothers, whereas other people just they'll have a kid. And these things are just not even on the radar of consideration. So it's just interesting to think like you see a blanket statement like this, and it's like, well, does it really apply to everybody? Probably not.
And then similarly to that, I guess, women are working more, they're spending longer in their careers. And it just made me think about like this Vanity Fair article in which apparently they deemed like the girl boss era is just decidedly over, apparently. And, what used to be sort of like this like big deal has now become like a joke or like a meme or whatever. But I think we've had discussions and obviously in our internal discussions as well, but we don't really know what the next iteration or version of this is. Like it's sort of like where does that leave working women? Where does that leave working women who want to become mothers? Like there's just, there seems to be sort of this empty space that is kind of up for grabs and like nobody really knows what to do with it. Because if you try to do it, then like, does that say something about yourself? Or like, there seems to be a lot of barriers, maybe. I'm not sure, but it's an interesting thought.
Yeah. There is a vacuum here for the woman that these girl bosses were speaking to. I think a lot of this was the media hype cycle. It was unfair to a lot of these women. Yes, there were problems in their companies and the way that they led. And there were some problematic things. But I think we forget that these girl bosses also won us a lot of advancement in certain ways. Like they gave a whole generation of girls permission to think about themselves differently, permission to talk differently in meetings. I have a lot of stories where I felt like I would wither in conversations because I felt that I was being too bossy. I was told I was too bossy. Even in grad school. And it's so funny, at NYU, they took all the women aside before we started our classes for those 2 years and like gave us like a pep talk, like conference about being assertive in the classroom, talking, leaning in. And then I had one bad experience the first week in class and I just could not talk for 2 years. I was just so like embarrassed. So girl bosses did something. They gave voice to that experience. Now we've soured on them. And there's definitely like, I don't think we still need something. You're right, Rebecca.
I think also too, again, it's sort of that weird, strange, like double standard. And I think there was like a study that spoke to how with like female bosses tend to be punished more than when they do something wrong. As opposed to men, and the punishment seems a lot more like we were just talking about in terms of like the media hype cycle and things like that. Like it becomes sort of sensationalized a little bit more than maybe a lot of male CEOs who do equally or maybe worse things that don't get mentioned. So yeah, it's just another thing to consider.
Out with sex positivity, in with single positivity. As more and more of us are vocally living a single life and proud of it, and not thinking we need any partner to be fulfilled. 57% of Americans aren't looking for a relationship currently, which is quite a lot. And that's heavily gendered. It's interesting. More and more women are likely to say that than men, which speaks to a lot of other trends. The rise of unmarriable men, girl bosses, all these things. Girls, women will look around and say, I don't want to marry any of these losers, right? So it's like I'm way better off alone. So I think, and I hear all these men are like, no, marry me, marry me. But yeah, all I want to do is play video games, right? So it's like, I think all of that is kind of captured in here, in addition to urbanization and all the other things and all the technologies we've been talking about to make it easier to stay connected and like live a meaningfully rich life while alone. So
There's kind of a backlash, and I've kind of seen it more this summer, and I feel like it's been building since like 2020, maybe 2019, of like a bridesmaid backlash. And a lot of it has to do with like finances. They said Wedding Wire found that the average bridesmaid being a bridesmaid spent about $1,200, and I'm pretty sure that doesn't include like the bachelor party.
Yeah.
For context, they said rent, average one bedroom apartment's $900. So people are saying, it's like becoming a, part-time job to become a bridesmaid nowadays. So there's been a lot of articles popping up about like, how do you say no, etiquette wise, to being a bridesmaid? When is it becoming too much? So interesting conversation about like what it means to actually like show up for your friends. And, is there kind of a balance of, okay, like, when does it become too much of a financial burden, essentially? And, they said also that a third of people were, of all genders, so men and women, were going into debt being in a bridal party, essentially.
I've heard that too. And I have a very reaching theory that when culture doesn't give you traditions, capitalism will create traditions for you. And this feels like it's fulfilling a ritualistic need through the language of capitalism.
Definitely.
Been made fun of for having a diaper keg for my kid and having buying Michelle a push present for delivering. My friends are like, what is this, millennial like rituals, like what, like, yeah. So you're totally right, Jasmine.
Even I drew the line at push presents. I would not let that happen, but that's interesting. I was surprised when you said you did that. I was like, that is not on brand for Zach.
All right, now we're going to look at equity and inclusion. So things that are broadly concerned with involving more people or representing more people, and then also equity, and not just in terms of race and gender, but also we're going to be looking a little bit at the environment and fashion as well. So
Pinterest released an announcement of their algorithm and how they want to showcase, every single body type on your discovery feed. And so they took 5 billion images of people of all shapes and sizes, so that, to help people, make sure people feel seen, and to make sure that obviously it's not biased towards a very specific type of person. It's Holly and I were briefly having a conversation about this in terms of like what this means in terms of like me filtering from my algorithm versus like Pinterest sort of maybe taking control in some ways of like my feed, not necessarily like in like good ways, but it just kind of was like an interesting idea of like how much like organizations are responsible for what you see and like diversifying that as opposed to what you specifically want to see based on maybe your subconscious bias. So interesting thought.
That is very interesting. Mm-hmm.
I think we should really keep an eye on this because, like, obviously in society we've been talking a lot about how, like, we just funneled into echo chambers, and so this like potentially anti-echo chamber work that they're doing. Like, it's kind of interesting because, like, yes, you're solving a problem, potentially creating other future problems down the line, but like, it'd be very interesting to see how other companies also respond to this, because now every social media company is their algorithm. So
that's kind of what we're talking about in the context of like that anti-echo chamber of what happens when you see something that you're not usually used to seeing or tuned to, like how does that change how you perceive the world maybe. So.
Perhaps this was supposed to be in the other section, but I also put it in here. But Lyft launched a new feature to let riders choose other women drivers, and to respond to demand for greater safety. And it just kind of made me wonder in terms of, I guess it does actually kind of come back to equity a little bit in terms of like, does this actually create safer environments, or are we just creating more reasons to sort of hate like, or, create boundaries or things like that. It was just like a thought that I had.
Very good point, Rebecca, to see both sides of that. It's doing both.
Next is this article that I came across in terms of how apparently women are just always the wrong age. You're either too young and so you're infantilized in your workplace, or you're too old and now you're experiencing ageism in the workplace. Um, just that, apparently it's just very difficult to just be a woman in the workplace altogether, and feel very seen and in your position and in an authority, or, taken seriously essentially, on all levels.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of related to that, there was a couple studies that were done about how apparently it's just debunking the myth that women don't ask or negotiate for their salaries, and that in fact, contrary to what most people think, women do ask, they don't just, their proposals aren't accepted. They're more likely to get rejected essentially. And it's just the idea that like we need to stop talking about how like women aren't speaking up. We have to address an underlying issue that is causing perhaps the gender pay gap.
So this New York Fashion Week passed, there was sort of a theme of secondhand September, which was actually started by Oxfam, United Kingdom. And essentially it was a campaign to promote secondhand shopping and then also restyling clothing in your wardrobe. So for example, Diane von Furstenberg, she didn't have a traditional runway show. She just encouraged customers to visit her flagship in Chelsea and buy secondhand pieces that they had. And then Ulla Johnson had a vintage line for sale. And then Madewell, Banana Republic, Reformation, they're actually having partnerships with thredUP. So it's essentially it's kind of dubbed recommerce. So brands are engaging more with platforms like Archive, thredUP to kind of recapture some of those sales of the secondhand market. And MM LaFleur was able to do this and grow sales by 3%. So even on the runways, we were seeing a lot of vintage, like purposely redone, like outfits that were vintage. They brought them back out of the archives, or just they were emulating the vintage look. But overall, it was just, they were really embracing secondhand and really, again, it was about sustainability, the environment, but also the next slide. There is very much a large trend that the secondhand market is going to open up quite a bit and really double from last year to 2027. So we're really seeing, this giant growth in the market. And so retailers are going to need to recapture some of those sales.
Yeah, secondhand is just like every year you hear about the market growing and it's not stopping. It's just, it keeps growing and growing. It's very interesting.
I think what's fascinating here is that this is kind of feels like the opposite of the trend of AI. AI being like creating a lot of new stuff, and this is kind of moving in the opposite direction. It's interesting. I don't know what that means, but you've got two kind of dichotomous forces in the market here.
This next section is looking at different tensions we're having in privacy. So kind of discussing our need to like be seen and to be heard in the larger, internet, but then also like different privacy concerns we have, especially with the rise of AI, and kind of how do we negotiate and what's kind of coming down the pipeline in terms of that.
So it turns out that cars are actually the worst product category, when it comes to privacy. Especially like newer models have, begun to like put literally computers in cars. And so they're tracking basically so much data, and doesn't seem like there's a lot of necessarily parameters to protect or, protect that data or make sure that it's in the right hands and things like that. And so the privacy conversation is interesting because we're so protective of our privacy, but at the same time, we're also willing to give it up for our benefit. So, for things like Spotify Wrapped, like we're very much willing to give up our data for things like that. But we're very, strict when it comes to other categories, like for example, cars. This next slide in conjunction, like with that, similarly, we're also obsessed with sort of seeing other people's lives and sort of the invasion of privacy. Like if we sometimes feel like we're owed sort of this inside look into people's lives. And this poster girl brand did a tabloid inspired shoot for their like clothing like the campaign, and it sort of is like speaks to the Y2K 2000 early 2000s celebrity scandal, and just that it's coming, privacy and this surveillance is sort of comes through in our pop culture and things like this. And obviously we see things like the Gwyneth Paltrow ski incident, and then, Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case. Like all these things are like out in the public, in the open, which could be very much a huge, like we're like very much going into their like deep, dark secret lives. And so I shared this in our company Slack, but this if I go missing folders, they're niche, but they are coming out, and people are putting things like their medical records, like, strands of their hair, fingerprints, very personal information into these binders, which could be kind of vulnerable to be posting online and sharing online, in case, what if it gets into the wrong hands or whatever. But it's sort of this, again, this idea of like how privacy, we're allowing ourselves to like give this to the public if in case something happens to us, obviously for good reason. But I think there's also reason to believe that this might not even be viable for police, because you can't ever guarantee who it's coming from, etc. But it just, yeah, women just being very fearful potentially, and having it has potential negative effects actually than more positive ones.
Is this just a consequence of people listening to way too many true crime podcasts?
Yes, it
Yeah,
very
that's what it says.
explicitly calls that out, like crime
Mostly.
junkies and other true crime content.
There's a
Yeah.
whole hobby category emerging here. That's my read on this.
This next one, it turns out people are not too happy about this. That the NYPD is using drones to monitor backyard parties to make sure nothing nefarious is going on. It's just interesting. Like, I'm shocked we're not already using more drone technology to enforce laws. Like, why not? Like, we're gonna have to rewrite some laws on that. It gets really complicated. But NYPD seems to be doing it, much to the chagrin of New Yorkers.
It does feel like a huge breach of privacy, though. Like, they can't be able, or they shouldn't be able to see into your backyard just if they want to. That seems strange.
Right.
It's a fascinating legal problem because they have police helicopters. So they can, I mean, they could theoretically have line of sight anyway. And if they're not in your, if they're looking in but not in your airspace for your property, like, that's a tough one.
Yeah, that's my question. Like how, like redefining your airspace, like how far up given, and would that change over a different area? I don't know. That's just interesting to think about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it comes back to this theme we see is like a lot of technology, the battleground ends up being the courtroom for like how we understand and use these, just like IP with AI. Like it's just like this is, the court is more and more the landing zone for all these conflicts.
So this is about face recognition technology. So Google and Facebook were developing this, and then they kind of pulled back because they kind of saw, oh, this may be a little dangerous. Although we do have some features of facial recognition in a lot of things, and Facebook did get sued for, where that feature came out, where you could recognize, now Meta, people, to catalog them and tag them in pictures. And so they actually, Facebook and Google were kind of buying smaller startups that they saw that had face recognition technology. And part of that was to kind of delay the release. So they were kind of like people rising, they snap them up. But there's other startups that have recently come up where essentially they just found like code online. There's a lot of open source technology to be able to do this. So there's one specific place called Clearview AI. And essentially what this technology can do is like you can point it at someone, they could tell them their name, like their address, like really personal information. Obviously, it can be used for good. Like if you're at a dinner party and you forget someone's name, like it'll literally tell you the name of the person. But obviously, it can also be used for surveillance or, just nefarious purposes of, again, if you see a cute person at the bar, you could just be able to look and like get details on them. So it kind of gets pretty hairy pretty quickly in terms of how this could go. And a lot of the open source, it was interesting, like about this, like the open source code, they're just like, oh yeah, like please use this responsibly, which is that's a whole other story. So
Yep.
Yeah, this category just basically is speaking to, where we pay our like most of our attention, very simply, and a lot of these signals sort of speak to that, where we spend our time, where we get our news, etc., things like that.
So, TikTok, there is kind of unofficial TV watching going on TikTok where people will upload content illegally to TikTok and from streamers services. But last month, Peacock actually on purpose put a pilot episode of a new comedy series called Killing It on there, and it was uploaded in 5 episodes. And over 7 million users actually viewed the videos on TikTok. So it's kind of meeting the new audience where potentially they are when they're spending the most time. So it kind of opens up some more interesting questions of like to how, creators can get paid. and how that would work on TikTok and how we could kind of quantify that and how much reach things are getting. So really, this is the first time a streamer has like purposely put full episodes of their TV shows on TikTok. So it might be a future place that, we found there's series written for YouTube, TikTok, but this is really interesting to go from being a big streamer to putting your content on TikTok.
This is making me think of Quibi. If Quibi launched today, would it have been successful? I don't know. It's an interesting question.
Similarly to what we were just talking about in terms of viewing things more on social media, this might not be surprising. Like we're more and more people, especially young people, are getting their news and their media from social media apps as opposed to traditional media outlets. So obviously that's a lot of implications for journalism and people who are trying to get the news out there, like in which channels and how they need to reach their people. And then the next slide just speaks more to that. Between the social media apps, Facebook is sort of waning a little bit, and the influence of Facebook is sort of going down. And then all these other apps, like TikTok, for example, have grown significantly, obviously, especially amongst younger generations.
I'm surprised Reddit isn't in that list.
I just wanted to point this out because we can just breeze through it quickly. Just essentially that Spotify's been investing a ton in podcasts. It's just not turning out to be super fruitful. Not a lot of people are interested in podcasts. The question is whether is it the content or is it just like the circumstance? Like, are people just like, what is the reason why people are listening to podcasts more? Is it because people don't commute to work anymore, or is it because something else? I'm not sure. People don't have time, maybe. Just an interesting open question there.
This is an app for you to hang with a celebrity, like a sports athlete, and watch a game with them and pay them to do it, just like Twitch. So I think that that's interesting. This is a new social media app I saw an ad for on television last night called We Are 8. That's a new crop of social media apps that are trying to be forces for good. It's just interesting. They're trying to change incentives. They're trying to make you feel that you can do positive things for the world by hanging out here and posting pictures and giving through that versus being sold to. We'll see. I mean, I think it's part and parcel with the decline of social media, as we talked about before. I feel like it's a little too wholesome. Wholesome generally doesn't sell, but maybe that's changing. I don't know.
I don't think so. We've been pitched apps like this since the beginning. None of them really take off.
Yep, exactly. But I was just shocked that they had TV budgets. It was like broadcast TV, 30-second spot, which wouldn't have been cheap.
That's interesting.
Same thing here. Don't have to spend a lot of time on this one. Different take on it, but same.
I mean, I think the takeaway here is that there is intent to build infrastructure in that direction. The question is like, what is the successful platform for that infrastructure?
This next section is just general signals we've been seeing, more long-term signals that we kind of will probably keep tabs on where they go.
This one I shared in our Slack too, but wanted to mention here. It was just really interesting. Who knew Olive Garden could bring Americans together? Turns out like Americans are drive nearly twice as far just to go to an Olive Garden as they do church. And it might be seemingly really not that maybe special compared to like a lot of like niche restaurants and cool like vibes and aesthetic vibes or whatever that like a lot of smaller places are trying to create. But Olive Garden was more likely to have a lot of cross-class friendships, a lot of people who come from different class backgrounds and situations just coming to enjoy, breadsticks and salads and chicken Alfredo pasta. I thought it was really kind of sweet and surprising.
Guys, at the Olive Garden, when you're here, you're family.
They gave up that tagline.
They did? Ooh,
yeah.
Why?
It was a whole big thing on like Jimmy Fallon. They were talking about retiring it. So like Jimmy Fallon took over the thing. I remember it was like a whole little like shtick.
Oh.
But they don't say that in their ads anymore. They retired it. Somebody should fact check that, but I'm like 99% sure.
I had to include this just because it's a topic of conversation at our place of employment. Earlier and earlier, the pumpkin spice latte gets released every year. This trend line gets earlier. So pretty soon, like in 2030, when AI peaks, it's going to be like 4th of July, pumpkin spice latte. It's like every year.
Dunkin' is crazy. August, geez, that's nuts.
So what is the rate per decade? We're looking like 3 weeks per decade. How?
was telling Zach, I think, and Rebecca, I have a theory that this is like an economic indicator. So I think like the earlier and earlier they release it, like the worse people maybe feel about the economy. I
Oh
also feel this way
boy.
about like Christmas decorations. So like I don't know, like here and a few other places I've observed, like Christmas decorations and like Christmas items started coming out in July of this year. So to me,
Mm.
like that signals like we're gonna have a very weak holiday shopping season.
That's a very, very interesting theory. I like that. Although I do know there is a tradition of Christmas in July for some retailers where like so I don't know like if you're like me and get really into the holidays, there are influencers that the whole year they are just hunting for that holiday. And so like they're like places like Home Goods or At Home or Michael's, they like have a relationship with like those holiday fanatics, and people know when like their stuff is coming out, when they're going to start seeing the end caps. It's like a whole two-way thing. And I think July always is like a you give a little jolt of Christmas in July just to keep people happy.
I guess too, I would say like to me it feels too like the less people are looking forward to things like in their lives or in society, like the earlier we're starting to do. Like we have to have
Sure.
our little thrill, I guess, of
Yeah.
pumpkin
Yeah.
spice or holiday.
I think what I want to understand is like the semiotics of Halloween. Like I feel like it's becoming more of an abstract concept, and that's why it's like moving earlier. And so I'm just kind of wondering, like, what does it really mean to us, and like how is that meaning evolving? Because something's going on here, and it's really interesting.
Somebody did write an article, I don't know where it was, about how Home Depot's 10-foot skeleton like had
So-
significant, like it was a real signal of what was happening in culture. I wish I remember what they were arguing in that article, but it was something about like flagrancy or something, because it's not like you're just buying the skeleton, you're buying an argument with the HOA, and you're buying something very expensive that you're gonna have to keep up for the whole year. And some people will put Christmas hats on their skeletons in December. It's a whole thing. So when you buy it, it's like a critique on like what our relationships have become and our communities have become and consumerism has become. It's interesting. It's a bellwether.
I want to be
guess.
friends with that author. I think we would hit it off for sure.
It's like there must be a whole community, like a meetup of all these 10-foot skeleton owners. And
So it turns out we're potentially wrong about retail. Turns out people still want the retail experience. You just need enough money to create something that people want to be a part of. And Bass Pro in, I think, yeah, along in Memphis, Tennessee, is this giant pyramid. I think it's like 30 something floors. Yeah, 32-story metal pyramid on the banks of the Mississippi River. It's just got all kinds of stuff in it, not just merchandise. And so just a reminder that, just because like we all like the internet came and just because of Amazon and things like that doesn't mean that we don't want retail experiences. Like Warby Parker and Parachute have accelerated new store openings, which there must be a reason people still
Wow.
want to, try new shoes and, check out a mattress or, touch linens in person. So yeah, it's just the fact says here more than 80% of retail purchases made in America are still made in person, which is a
Yeah.
huge percentage. So yeah, it's something to consider when we're thinking
So different
about.
than so different than other
Yeah.
countries. Bass Pro it makes me think that must feel like a Patagonia for retired people in a Bass Pro shop that big. Like it must feel like that for a different crowd.
We have
My-
one
Yeah.
here, and it looks like the opening of like it looks like you're going into Disneyland when you. It's
that's
it's
fun.
ginormous.
my question here is, I feel like this is not unrelated to all of the strong, tight infrastructure that we talked about earlier. And I wonder how, just like influencers are becoming communities, are stores becoming communities? Like, are we seeing that the way in which they are building engagement is changing? Like, is that dynamic something that they're specifically innovating on? I don't know, but it's worth paying attention to because I think they're related.
This is just something I found. Essentially, obviously cruises declined during the pandemic for obvious reasons. And they've actually kind of researched and are projected to very much increase through 2027. So during COVID, we obviously had like these, cruise ships that were kind of stranded different places because they couldn't dock, because of COVID, and or they become kind of COVID ships. But ultimately, again, people are just really going to lean into this cruise experience. I don't know if it's maybe because it's good bang for your buck, or because,
I
a lot
think
of
it's
decisions
I think
are
it's
made for you on cruises already and like it's less planning. I don't know.
I think it's another ritual for people. What was
Mhm.
interesting about people during COVID is most of those people did not ask for refunds. They asked to reschedule their
Mhm.
cruises.
Yep.
And that seemed nuts. It's because those kinds of rituals that mark the passage of time, your annual trip or whatever, are very important. I think like cruise experiences have probably also gotten a lot better than when we used to go as kids, but people really like it is. I would venture to say it's one of those things that feels like a ritual for them.
So there's this model. It's a digital artificial model called Nunori, and she was just signed with Warner Music Record. It's their first ever digital pop star. And her first single came out last week. It's called Dominoes, and it was rendered using AI voices. And then there's inspiration drawn from real voices, and they have people listed out. But essentially, she's also done like different collaborations, Balenciaga, Dior, and it's kind of interesting. Has a big following on social media, so it's kind of be interesting to see who we, I guess, like listen to music from, and who we're gonna like. Are we gonna relate more to AI people, or enjoy their music more, or really just embrace, I think, more the human side of music and really embrace human musicians?
I wonder when can we pay to go on a holiday with her?
Yeah, it's a good
Yeah,
question. Probably soon.
where's the Niori cruise you can all take together?
There it is. That actually I could believe happening.
And a surprise to probably not many people, Gen Z is rethinking the idea of college, going to college, what it actually means for them. So overall, 4 million fewer teens enrolled in college in 2022 than in 2012. Obviously, because the price tag is increasing, but also because people are saying that, they're not actually getting prepared for the working world when they're going to college. So STEM, business, engineering, they feel they're not being properly trained, for jobs for the future. So really they're placing more emphasis on, boot camps, apprenticeship programs, training programs. So obviously we're also going to see a decline in the amount of people going to college just because of population. But this is also kind of a double whammy in terms of it just might not be as relevant anymore for people.
I don't know. This idea of college, I feel like will never die. Like
I think it,
applications still
yeah,
go up every year, right? Like
yeah.
it's still hard to get in. Like there's always an influx of applications.
I
I
think the
think
main takeaway is
flagship
just
universities, the Ivies, go ahead.
just this. There's more and more pressure on the system. Like something has to fundamentally change because the economics are just the value economics are changing because everyone's saying their job's going to be irrelevant anyway. So I think that like it's such a slow industry, but there is some innovation required here, and the pressure to see that is growing.
Just a real quick, what's going on in the VC landscape? Everybody's wanting seed deals. Seed deals are growing, growing, growing. All the other series are shrinking, shrinking, shrinking. Deals overall are down. Get in early or don't get in at all seems to be the top line.
This one I came across very interesting. This company is creating basically essentially Lego homes, and they're trying to change the housing industry to be more like the automotive industry, where you just basically build a bunch of parts and you just put them together. And so they're building all these like homes just from these panels and like sticking them together, and it's supposed to help with sort of like the housing shortage and things like that. But if you go to the next slide, it's obviously in strong contrast with the fact that prices of housing is really going up, and more and more people can't afford homes. So even if, let's say, these Lego homes build a bunch of these houses, like will people even be able to afford them? Who knows? And then
Hmm.
the next slide is speaking to specifically New York, and how now for a single to have like one child, like you need to be making at least 300K to live in the city, which is kind of wild and seems very like unreal. Um, yeah, so just the affordability crisis is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and I don't really know where it's all going.
Last but not least, just an interesting new take culturally on books. This person, 2.9 million views. I read every book Kendall Jenner recommended. As we have living in this digital culture of all the things that we've been talking about this entire presentation, the humble book maybe still is it a signal? Is the book taking on new semiotics? Like, with the rise of book talk and a broad acceptance that reading is good for you and screens are bad, the literary world has an extra charm. We aspire to read, but now we photograph ourselves reading. And yeah, who knows? Is reading a status symbol? Will it ever change? Do we think readers are cooler or less cool than before? I don't know. I don't have the answer. But if Kendall reads, like, people follow.
I will say this too. I do feel like there's so much good literature now. So much. Incredible writers. I know there were plenty of writers when I was growing up, and as someone who's just gotten back into fiction, I'm really blown away at like how people are, how prolific some of these writers are, and like some of the really great books. Like, it just feels like there's a way more good literature out there now than ever before.
What I want to know is like when the first New York Times bestseller written by an AI comes out. That'll be a big moment.
Oh boy. Yeah. There was already a romantic novel writer. Holly, weren't you saying something about that? About there was like a romance novel
She was in AI copied one of her books, but
Okay.
I don't know if it made the bestseller list. Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. It's coming.
I don't know how I would feel. How would you guys feel reading a really good book that you know wasn't written by a human?
Ooh, I think you just connect with it less.
That's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting,
but I don't know.
The question is if it is genuinely a fantastic book, like the plot, the characters, all of those things. If the substance is good, does it matter? Like we don't know.
Well, there will.
But I guess if it's like a one-off book, maybe I wouldn't care so much about I don't know. Yeah, like if it's a really good story and like I don't know if I'll care that much if it was written by an AI, but let's say like I really like Murakami books, but that's because I think I like Murakami as an author. So then what does that mean? Like then I'll just like everything he writes. Even maybe it's like maybe it's objectively bad, but I'll still read it because I like the author. But then, if it's just like a really good one-off book that was written by an AI, I wouldn't care as much.
Maybe
the end game is that the AI will be able to write you a book just for Rebecca that will be something that she absolutely loves.
Right.
In which case, I don't know how I would feel about that. I feel like I would be curious. I'd want to read it for sure.
I shared an article on Slack a while back about how reading actually connects you to another soul. And like that's why I read, is for that reason. And so I'm not interested in anything written by an AI because it's not connecting me to another soul. Like, sure, if you can spin a good plot, right? Like I don't read for plot, right? You read for like connection, and AI there's nothing to connect to. So
it's the fundamental challenge.
Speaking of connection, my favorite part is when I read a good book and then I find the community around that book. That's what's really exciting. And I wonder, the real question is, are communities going to form around AI? Like that, what do you even build a community around if like the author isn't there anymore?
Let me ask this one stress testing question.
I was thinking about that. Like book clubs would die.
Yeah. Well, let's say that there's a franchise, you absolutely love it, there's 6 books, and the author passes away before they get to write the last book in the series. Would you read it if the last book was AI generated? Zach, I know, like, would you read that?
Yeah, because I've read a 6-part, like, very confessional, book, and I think I would. I don't know that I would finish it, but I would. Yeah, I think I would. I'd pick it up and I'd read it, and because it would be a different experience. You'd be comparing it. You'd be like, yeah. So 100%, I think I would in that case. Yes. So you got me.
Okay.
For some reason, it makes me think of like watching like sequels after the original movie, and like there wasn't supposed to be another sequel, but like they just kept coming out.
Yeah.
Like that's like my perception of it.
Yeah. This is Disney just milking the bejesus out of just every franchise imaginable. That's coming.
Exactly.
All right.
Cool. All right, guys. Great report for September.